Welcome to A Life Lived Joyfully, brought to you by the Guadalupe Radio Network. Join us as we explore the call to holiness and the life of virtue. Here's your host, Monsignor Charles Pope.
It's good to be with you today. What a difference a week makes in the weather. It was really cold and snowing. We had about 6 inches of snow, I think, a week ago today. It stayed cold most of the week, and all of a sudden yesterday this big snow eraser came, and it hit 60 degrees. So what a difference a week makes in the weather. Well, listen, I want to follow up a little bit on a couple of conversations that were taking place this week. Other hosts, that's what I mean to say, of A Life Lived Joyfully, Steve Gleason and Sarah Soto. And Steve was talking a little bit about Catholic schools and the Catholic Schools Week that's celebrated throughout much of the country at this time in the Catholic Church. And then Sarah was also talking a little bit about suffering and why God, the question, why does God let this happen? Whatever this is, it's usually, some negative development. So I'll talk a little bit about, just follow up on those topics a little bit with some thoughts. Starting with Catholic schools, I mean, let's be honest, more than ever, we need Catholic schools. And yet more than ever, it's harder to keep them up, open and running. And when you think about it, the Catholic schools were originally founded and considered a great priority in the church here in America, because at the time it was perceived, and I think correctly so, that the school system was the public school system was predominated by basically a Protestant, approach to faith. In those days, it wasn't this radical separation of church and state that I don't think benefits anybody, Protestant or Catholic, was not up and running. And so there tended to be a very strong emphasis on the Protestant take on faith and use of the Protestant, scriptures and prayers and so on. In fact, I can tell you, I'm what am I, 60, coming up on 63. I was when I was in the school system down in Florida, in Jacksonville, Florida, which was really more like being in Georgia in those years. Nowadays you go to Florida, it's like you're back on the East Coast, man, up in the upper East Coast. I mean, the accents all go back to the Northeast. But back in the time I was in Jacksonville, which is right on the Georgia border, it was still the deep South, and people had accent. And I remember Mr. Bulwell, our principal, says, "Now they tell us we ain't supposed to be praying in school. Well, we're going to pray in this here school, and by gosh, we're going to pray." So every day we would get up and pray, and we'd read from the King James Bible. And then we would do the Our Father with the Protestant edition there at the end, "For thine is the kingdom and the power," and we say the Pledge of Allegiance, and we were off to our day. But as I say, that was very benign. But as I say, there was a concern that a lot of Catholics had in the immigrant years, that their children would come here and be overly influenced by Protestantism. And so we formed Catholic schools, and we raised our children in those schools, taught them the Catholic faith, among other things, of course, reading, writing, arithmetic, and of course the glories of the Catholic faith. It was all surrounded about the parish church and getting to Mass and confessions and processions and saints' days and, all of this. It was a way of immersing our children in a whole Catholic culture and making sure that they didn't get too influenced by the Protestant public schools. Well, now it's much worse. That is to say, what's going on in our public schools, I don't think I could, you can't make it up, some of this stuff. I mean, I have a couple of friends who still have to teach in these settings because that's their main source of income. And, oh my gosh, the stuff that they're telling you have to say to kids today, and you can't pronoun them, and all the stuff that you're supposed to present, and, you're supposed to talk to them about how beautiful and wonderful, the whole LGBTQIA agenda, trans, all these kinds of things are, and it's very, very pernicious. And, of course, we had these terrible wars in the public schools for a long time. You can't bring in a Bible. You can bring in a Quran. You can bring in anything else because that's just cultural, but you cannot bring in a Bible. You cannot mention Jesus. Now, you can mention almost anything else, but not Jesus. Well, again, this has been, the public schools have been heading downhill for a long, long time. And now it would seem, now again, I don't say this of every public school system, but a large number of them, it's really awful. The kids are almost learning anything but reading, writing, and arithmetic, and good American history, and so forth. So much ideology. We need Catholic schools more than ever, and yet sadly they're closing in large numbers in many parts of the country, especially in the Northeast, where the Catholic population has also decreased dramatically, and so on. Now, with all that in mind, we are, as I say, they're needed more than ever. And what keeps us from being able to keep a lot of them running is it is really costly. I remember even back some years ago, I'm thinking now back 15 years ago when I last had the numbers in my head, but it probably cost us close to $8,000-9,000 a kid, and we were only charging $4,500 in tuition. So the thing became a money pit. But if we charged more than tuition, we couldn't really have the number of students. Nobody could afford it. And so we were always in this conundrum of fundraising and trying to fill the gaps, and we formed coalitions and consortiums and all sorts of ways that we tried to pool our resources, but it just got unreachable, with the amount and the cost that it would take. And remember, as our buildings would get older, I remember one year I had to spend $300,000 to replace the school roof. That's huge, and thank God I had the money, could pay cash for it. But I tell you, it was a tough time, you see. And as I say, these are the things that I think we just had to, back in the day when we had so many religious sisters and we didn't really pay them much. And of course, now we can't do that. We would have to pay, even if we had a lot of religious sisters again, we would have to pay them a lot more. They had things like health care needs and elderly sisters to care for, and the kinds of things that, even we have to pay a just wage, and so at the end of the day, all of these are ways of saying that how much we need them more than ever, yet they've been kind of costed out of our reach, except for very wealthy or well-to-do parishes, and even they're struggling a little bit to keep those schools open. So, as I would say that, but in addition to that, I think historically we have to say that we went through a long period where Catholic schools declined, not only because, the academic situation was always very good in our Catholic schools, but I think a lot of people were also realizing there wasn't a lot Catholic about some of them. I mean, they weren't really holding up the faith, and we weren't exactly turning out spiritual giants. All of the studies show that children who, just because they went through Catholic school, were no more or less likely to stay with the faith than those who hadn't. And so again, I think a lot of pastors, unfortunately, began to sort of tune out and say, we're spending all this money, every available dollar, that giant sucking sound is all the money going over to the school. And so some priests and pastors began to become disaffected with the schools, and the constant demands for new textbook, new things, technologies, Pegasus boards, computer labs, all the things that it would just take today. It wasn't just books and pencils and paper and chalkboards anymore. It became more and more and more and more and more. It was never enough. And so all this money whirlwind, I think, was a huge factor. The fact that we really need to pay decent and just wages to teachers to attract good teachers, but also just because it's the right thing to do. And with all of that, we have had to unfortunately close a lot of schools. Even in my own diocese here of Washington, D.C., a lot of our schools have had to close. Once they were, filled with students, and now not so much. A little story about my own school. When I came here in 1993, originally to this parish, we had a school. It was complicated at the time. It was expensive. We were not exactly making any money, and we were losing money, but it was still manageable. But by the time I returned here, I was here from 1993 to 1999, but by the time I came here in 2007, the school had been under the care of a consortium, and the diocese had plowed almost $10 million into keeping our school and a number of other schools open, and a total actually of $60 million if you look at all the schools the diocese was trying to prop up and keep open, and the money just ran out, and we had donor fatigue. So it was decided to take these 10 parishes that were schools that were in this consortium, in the inner city consortium, and we had to pare them down to 4, one in each section of the city. And we would try, because most of them had half-empty seats and were hemorrhaging money. So the decision was made that we would go ahead and pare the number of them down to 4. Now, here then, though, came a very important moment for my own parish. My parish, especially at that time, was largely an African-American parish, and there were some charges. Well, this is racist. He's closing it because it's a black school. And I said, no, actually, the diocese is not closing our school. We are closing our school. We, this parish. He said, oh, no, we're not. We want to keep it open, Father. I says, okay, well, let me put some numbers up on the board. And if you want to keep it open, let's talk about what it's going to cost. Now, the diocese has said whether we open or close, whether we stay open or whether the church, the parish converts it over to a charter school, we're going to probably still get about $400,000 in tuition assistance we could expect maybe from the diocese. Now, with that, we bring in about that much again in tuition, but the total cost of running a benchmark school is closer to $1.4 million a year. And a benchmark school is a school that meets the standard criteria that we can say that we're turning out a good product that children deserve. And so if all of you will agree so this leaves us about $1 million short a year. If all of you will agree to double our offertory income, which is about $1 million now, just let's double it. It'll make it $2 million. And we can do that for 5 years going forward. We can keep the school open. So that's what it'll cost. The diocese says that we can't continue to give as much money as we have. How say you? Well, you all say that we want to keep the school open. So who will join me? Crickets, doubling our offertory and see. So I said, so you see what? It's not the diocese that's closing our school. We are closing our school. And I think that's important because there's an awful lot of the bishop's this and the bishop's. It's always going to be at the diocesan level that a lot of people see Catholic schools as succeeding or not. But really, it is a parish mission. Parishes can have schools, and it's a good thing to have a school, but it's costly. So the question is, will the parish continue to maintain what it takes to afford a school that would give a decent education for a decent price? The school would be subsidized somewhat by the parish and also by tuition. Is this something that a parish is willing to do? And right now, most of our parishes are either neither large enough or are not motivated enough to support and sustain a school. So I think we have to look at our own souls, not just shake our fist at church leadership and say this is all their fault. We have decided that it's not a sacrifice we're willing to make anymore. And I think if we have to own it. And I think that's important because it's always easy to blame the next person up the line if a school has to close or something. But at the end of the day, I think it's ultimately a decision. I asked for a show of hands of how many people in the parish had children in our school. Only 3 hands went up. And I knew that already, that most of the kids who go to our school were not parishioners. They were neighbor kids and needed an alternative to the public schools. But most of the families in my parish were no longer even sending their kids to the Catholic school. So all of these are factors. So I want to say that if we want Catholic schools to be strong, we have to be strong. But here's then where I would maybe go into maybe a more controversial place. I think the old model of a parish having a big building with a certain number of classrooms and a certain number of kids in every classroom and a certain number of grades and so on may be dated in many places. I think that the homeschooling movement has shown that there's a lot of potential in keeping education even more decentralized in the, quote, Catholic school system. Why did this happen in the first place? I think a lot of Catholics came to realize that Catholic schools were very expensive, but they were beginning to resemble the public school system too much. There were some weird ideas going back and forth. They didn't always feel like their kids were really coming out as spiritual giants, more religiously minded, that there were a lot of things that I'm paying a lot of money, but what are we getting from this? So a lot of parents began to become disaffected with the school leadership that began to sound more and more and to kind of ape the public school system. And whether that was a legitimate charge or not, that was what was perceived. And they began to just say, well, I'm going to homeschool my kids. Now, little by little, of course, this set up as that number began to grow. The often the number of families where you would ordinarily expect to get children into the Catholic schools were no longer sending them, but they weren't sending them to public schools. They were keeping them home and homeschooling, and this caused a kind of a little rivalry for a time there between the homeschoolers and the Catholic school kids, and it began to. It got a little heated for a while. I think it's largely resolving now. And I think I'll explain that to you after the break, but I think it's something important to discuss about how we might see Catholic education into the future.
Hey there, I'm Keith Downey, and I'm excited to journey with you on the road to holiness each weekday morning on the show Morning Joy from the Guadalupe Radio Network. Keeping our eyes on the Holy Spirit, we'll pray together, learn from the saints, meditate on the daily gospel, stay informed, and hang out as friends on the after show. This will be a daily adventure like no other. Join us every morning at 6 a.m. Central, 7 a.m. Eastern to start out each day with Morning Joy, where truth matters.
I'd known about the station for a long time, but I have to confess I never tuned in. Perhaps I was biased. But then that changed, actually. Once I started listening, I kept the dial where it was at. I like Teresa Tomeo and Al Kress. I just like their personalities. Call to Communion with Dr. Dave Anders and More to Life with Pop Checks. I really, really love the show. I've learned a lot. But, also, I really like there's prayers interspersed. I get a lot more praying done in the day that I wouldn't otherwise. We want to support the radio station for sure.
The Guadalupe Radio Network, Catholic Radio. Radio for your soul.
Hey, Donnie, what are the two most important things we receive at Mass?
The Christmas scripture.
That's right. All right, one more. Who loves you the most?
Jesus.
That's right.
Mary.
That's right. They love us too. If you don't educate your children in the faith, who will? Educate yourself and your family by listening daily to the Guadalupe Radio Network, and make sure to get the GRN app by logging online to grnonline.com.
Welcome back to A Life Lived Joyfully on the Guadalupe Radio Network. Give us a call. The lines are open at 877-757-9424. That's 877-757-9424.
Now, because 3 times is the charm, we'll see if it gets somebody to call 877-757-9424. Now, listen, I'd love to hear from you what you think again. I think what we're dealing with here with the Catholic schools is we had a period where homeschooling began to take off, especially among the most, I would say, religiously observant Catholic families. A lot of our Catholic schools and some pastors and others began to feel a little bit of the heat of kind of competition, if you will. And we said, you should have your kids in public and in Catholic school. And but again, well, I don't want to send them there because you're doing some funny stuff, and they don't really know that, and there's all the controversies that are going on in the Catholic Church get woven into that mix too. Okay, but I think what we're doing now, I think things have become, at least in dioceses in the Northeast and so on, where so many schools have had to close. We've had to finally come to some rapprochement, some agreement, if you will, with the homeschool community, and kind of set up a co-op where some of our Catholic school buildings can be used by homeschoolers they could still do some of the schooling of their kids at home, but they could also come in for certain topics. Now, let's put it this way. When your kids are really young and you're just teaching them really basic stuff like how to reading, writing, and arithmetic, you've got most parents, if one of them can stay home and spend that time with the kids, can pretty easily teach that at that level. But when you start getting those kids into sort of more complicated things, where math is more than just adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing, and you start bringing in fractions, but especially when you start hitting pre-algebra and algebra, a lot of parents are beginning to say, ooh, I've lost my ability to know all this. And so all of a sudden, you now need to think, well, either I got to send them to a school, or there's a teacher who is, knows this stuff and is paid to teach it, or I'm going to have to find some other way. One of the ways that homeschoolers have found this is to do something called co-oping, where they bring in some teachers, and a number of families, share the services and pay the salary and so on. And then they've also now begun with those kinds of things as the kids get a little older to use Catholic school buildings, some of the classrooms and things. And whereas pastors and dioceses and so on at once were a little bit hostile, now they're beginning to say, well, look, these are all our children, and we do need to come together and be part of a real extended co-op where we're helping all these kids. Because I'm going to tell you right now, the public schools are extremely bad shape in most places. I'm talking about with ideology, things absolutely inimical to the Catholic and Christian faith, to the scriptures and what is taught. All kinds of things, all from this transgenderism all the way down to just terrible, kind of what they call it, critical theory. It's not just critical race theory. There's all kinds of critical theory where it's the us versus them, the oppressor and the oppressed. All this kind of Marxist critical theory. All these things sweep through the public schools and have really taken up. And my gosh, what are you waiting for? Get them out of there. Well, here's what you're probably waiting for. I can't afford it, Father. I don't know what to do. We're barely making ends meet with both of us working. Which one of us would teach? And besides, it's not something I can easily do. My brother and sister-in-law have 9 kids, and they homeschool them. But of course, when they came to certain grades and levels, they did have to find other solutions because it just wasn't the kind of stuff that could easily be taught by a parent to a kid. Again, as I say, algebra or complex things like, biology and organic chemistry. Oh my gosh, chemistry is hard enough, but you go to organic chemistry, man, whew, that'll rack your brain. And so again, these are the kinds of things when you need to have either an academy. Now here in this diocese, we have had another bit of success with what we called niche marketing, where some of our schools had devoted themselves to classical education, right? And we have a St. Jerome's School, which is classical. And then they founded a high school, St. Jerome's Academy. And these things are there and available. And again, this is mainly parents coming together that began as a homeschool movement and have now founded certain schools that focus on classical education and stuff that's very friendly to the faith and turning out good Catholic people, Catholic kids who know the faith. And yes, it's often tied together with the Latin and Latin liturgy and so on, but it's not always. And it's one of these things where, again, these are some of the things that we're working through now, some different models. And I think to the degree that we as pastors and church leaders at every level can be supportive of this, I think the better, because the main goal, I think, at this point has got to be get them out of those public schools. Get them out of there. Do everything you can, do everything we can to get them out of those public schools, because it really has become ideology central. You say, but Father, our public school system isn't like that. Okay, good, I'm happy. But I'm going to tell you right now, so much of public education has been corrupted and co-opted. And a lot of it comes from federal regulations as well as some state regulations. And all of these things are important factors that it's just a mess. Get them out. And what can we do? We need Catholic schools more than ever. But more than ever, unfortunately, we have a hard time affording the old model. But what if some new models could come together? And what if we were able to do that? I'll give you another example of a different kind of a model. At some point, when we have to come to a place where it looks like one of our Catholic schools is going to be closing or probably needing to be closed, we try not to. So maybe 5 years out, as things, when there's certain indicators that have said this school's in some trouble, we gather the families and the parents and the teachers, and we gather them. We say, look, it doesn't look so good if things continue in this direction. What can we do to increase attendance? What can we do to lower cost? What can we do to help you to keep the school open? And we're going to spend 4 or 5 years with you. But if at the end of that period, it doesn't look like we can turn this around, we may then have to put you on a closing list for a final year. And if that can't be changed, then we'll have to finally, go ahead and close. Well, anyway, one of our schools said, well, all right, but here's another aspect. The diocese, canon law says this, but the diocese also has to say, these are your buildings. This is your school. At the end of the day, we may have to decide that we can't continue to help you with as much tuition assistance or whatever be there to bail you out. But if you want to keep that school open or some aspect of it open, like maybe the daycare or maybe some level, several levels of grades, maybe a middle school or something, you're free to do that. It's your building. So we have one of our schools in this diocese had been a Catholic school. They pulled out, and the parents there in that local area, that region, all decided to try to pull together and keep that school open on a smaller basis, and they've done that, and they've been able to keep it open now for about 5 or 6 years. We'll see where it goes, but as I say, it's not always the diocese that's got to be the one that supports the school. Parishes need to do their part, and the diocese can do some, but at some point, even if the diocese has to say we can no longer put lots of money here, that doesn't mean that parents can't decide themselves to try to do something. I also just say some niche marketing. I think we missed out when we failed to do more niche marketing, such as boys' schools or girls' schools. I think there's been an increasing understanding of the wisdom of some of that, especially when you start getting into fifth grade and above. Where, shall we say, the sexual differences become a little more distracting. Discipline and so on for boys and girls is something that's done a little bit differently. And so we would say that maybe some of the parishes might try a boys' academy or a girls' academy. Try some of these. These are some of the things that we've tried. Classical education, perhaps a school of the arts. Some parishes, some dioceses have one of their schools set aside for those who are artistic in terms of music and theater and so on, especially at the junior high and above level. We also have a one of our schools is more of a tech school in one of our dioceses in the area here. So again, all of these are ways of saying some of this modeling of niche marketing and focusing maybe on we're just going to have here a middle school because we see that there's a gap here that we need to fill. Things like that I think are going to be more important for the future. But above all, Catholic. See, and this is where I think we kind of got a little lost. A lot of our Catholic schools weren't really doing a lot. And some of them, especially when we found out that a lot of our Catholic schools here in the D.C. area were barely Catholic in the sense of even the kids going there, most of them weren't Catholic. And 80% were non-Catholic, 20% were Catholic. And again, at some point, the identity of the school is going to be affected by that. And unless we're getting huge numbers of converts and so on, we have to ask ourselves, well, what are we doing? What is the purpose of this school if it isn't to evangelize first and foremost and keep kids Catholic and make kids Catholic, help them to see the beauty of the faith? So a lot of people began to sort of sign off and say, this is a lot of money for no real results in terms of evangelization. So enough said on schools. I think that we're in a bad situation where, we want to keep as many, we have to keep them open more than ever, but more than ever it's hard to do that. So we'll have to just see how these I think, creative solutions go into the future. And I think the more that some of the dioceses can help and support some of these initiatives that have come from the grassroots and from the people of God, I think the better. I want to shift gears now. But by the way, if you want to talk about Catholic schools, give me a call at 877-757-9424. We got about a minute and a half or so before the break, but before that time, I want to maybe transition to this next topic that I know that Sarasota was talking about on suffering. Maybe this focal question: why does God let this happen? Whatever this is, fill in the blank. Why do bad things happen? Why does God allow so many terrible things to happen? Not just in the world we see now, even in the church. Why is the Lord allowing so much confusion and so much division and all this abuse and all the scandals? And why does He allow all this? And I think most of us are feeling. And when you look out your window, and probably not just out your window, even in your own house, you start to say there's a lot of disrepair at every level. The whole world's kind of gone seismic government shaky, the medical industry, all these people and institutions we used to trust, most people don't trust anymore, the media, all of these things, and in the church, we also see that there's all kinds of corruption and chaos and confusion everywhere you look, in the church, in the world. Where can you go to find a place where this isn't just the main thing? Well, it's tough, and these are questions that enter our minds. So when we return, I want to spend a little bit of time talking with you about what might be going on both in the world and the church and what we can learn from it. That's when we return.
Thanks for listening to A Life Lived Joyfully. Do you have a question for Monsignor Pope, or would you like to comment? Give us a call now at 877-757-9424. Again, that number is 877-757-9424. We'll be back after the break.
Arm yourself for the daily spiritual battle. Visit St. Michael's Armory for beautiful sacramentals, recast antique medals and religious jewelry, and our exclusive sterling silver and wool brown scapulars. Pick up these means to strengthen your soul and arm yourself well for the battle of life. stmichaelsarmory.com. That's stmichaelsarmory.com. Spiritual armor for the battle of life.
Lent is right around the corner, and now is a good time to begin preparing. Would you like to gain a better understanding of the Sacrament of Reconciliation? Hi, I'm Dave Palmer here at the GRN. On Friday, January 26th, during the noon hour Central Time, I'll host a live special network program with Father James Yamauchi, focusing on the Sacrament of Reconciliation from the perspective of a parish priest. This is your chance to not only learn, but also to call in with your questions. It's Friday, January 26th, beginning at 12 noon Central.
Today, the GRN salutes the Mr. Pay It Forward raffle ticket guy. I'm gonna pay it forward. Woo-hoo. Whenever you buy a raffle ticket to try and win a 2024 black Mercedes-Benz GLB 250, you don't stop at 1 + 1 for my pastor. Thanks to you, we're going to reach our goal of 1,000 Pay It Forward recipients. Just remember to pay it forward. Oh, yeah.
Mother of Divine Grace School has served families worldwide for over 25 years, guiding them in implementing this fully accredited classical curriculum at home. Founded by homeschooling veteran and author Laura Berquist, the Mother of Divine Grace School program is faithful to the teaching of the Catholic Church and supports parents in their mission to educate their children in the truth. Call 805-646-5818 or visit modg.org.
Welcome back to A Life Lived Joyfully on the Guadalupe Radio Network. Give us a call. The lines are open at 877-757-9424. That's 877-757-9424.
Good, I'd love to hear from you. I'm Monsignor Charles Pope, and leading you here today on A Life Lived Joyfully. And I can say that we want to restore our Catholic schools. You heard that. Some of you, at least, I don't know if everyone hears the same commercials on every station, but supportive messages. The Mother Divine Grace School, which is classical education for homeschoolers, is if you do homeschooling, you're not on your own. There are programs out there that are available for you. And just once again, encourage you, talk to some homeschooling parents. They're great at networking and sharing resources, and I can assure you, you wouldn't be alone, even though it sounds like homeschooling is just, you're all alone, but you're not. You're not. All right. Now, I'm going to turn our direction now more towards this question of suffering and that Sarasota was talking about earlier this week. And I'm going to start out by telling you a parable. Because, I think part of the reason that we suffer is that very often for us, when we ask this question, why does God let this happen? We presume that we always know what's good and what's bad for us. We say, well, this is good and this is bad. Well, it might not. Maybe it could be just what we prefer. And And are we always in a position to even know really what's good, what's a blessing and what's a burden, what's a blessing or a curse? Sometimes we're not, and this parable tries to illustrate that. So here's the parable. It's that there was a man who had a farm, a small farm, and he had one horse and he had one son, and this was the ability to work the farm. Well, one day the wind blew and the gate blew open, and the horse ran off. And the man's friends came to condole with him. Oh, too bad for you! You lost your only horse. It's gonna be hard to have a farm if you can't have a plow horse. Oh, gosh, bad for you. He says, Well, we'll see. Next, 2 days later, the horse came back and brought with him a wild mare and a stallion. And so his friends came to rejoice with him. Well, good for you. Now you have 3 horses. See, look at this. And he says, we'll see. Well, 2 days after that, the young boy, the son, I should say, is breaking in the stallion, and he gets thrown by the horse, and he breaks his arm and his leg. His friends came to condole with him. Too bad for you. You lost your only laborer now, your son. He's got these broken leg and arm. And the man just said, we'll see. 2 days later, the emperor's army came through calling the draft. All the young able-bodied men have to go off to war. But the son couldn't go because he had a broken arm and a broken leg. So he didn't have to go to the war, and his friends came to rejoice with him. Great, your son doesn't have to go to the war. Well, the man just said, we'll see. And, the story goes on like that. But the point being is that we're not always in a position to say from day to day what's a burden or what's a good thing or what's a bad thing, what's a blessing and what's a curse, or, at least in the generic sense. Okay, so look, the guy lost his horse, but that was only the prelude to him getting 3 horses. Well, then the horse threw the one son from and broke his arm. But that means he didn't have to go to the war. I mean, do you really think that we know from day to day when we ask this question, why do bad things happen? Why does God let this bad thing happen? Are we really in a position to always know that something is a bad thing? Very often we're not. I know we all would prefer one thing rather than another. Maybe in the moment we prefer to be wealthy rather than poor. We would prefer to be healthy rather than sick. And so, but listen to what God says. God warns about wealth. He says, look, how hard it is for the wealthy, the rich, to enter the kingdom of heaven. Hard, see? And yet, so is it really necessarily a blessing to be wealthy rather than poor? See? Now, destitution is another thing, but does not God counsel poverty? He does. But you see how we think? We think that something is a preferred outcome and is good, and if it doesn't happen the way I think is a good or preferred outcome, it's terrible. And we say, why does God let this happen? Well, maybe he's trying to save your soul. You can go to Harvard or you can go to hell. And the point is that we see that too many parents, for example, are all focused on getting their kids to Harvard when they're not too worried about keeping them out of hell. But we have this idea of what's good and what's a blessing and what's a good thing and what's a bad thing. But it's not always the case. God does not as man sees does God see. Man sees the appearance, but God looks into the heart. So, or again, we would all prefer to be healthy rather than sick. Well, all right, understand. But at the end of the day, does not God hear the cry of the poor? Does he not? Are their prayers not especially powerful? Do not those who suffer have especially high places in heaven? For example, Jesus actually himself says that many who are last are going to be first. So before you want to run to the head of the line here in this world, maybe you better think twice and say, well, this world's about 70 or 80 years in length, but eternity's a lot longer. And I'm not saying we look for suffering, but if suffering comes, maybe it's not the worst thing in the world. Maybe God is preparing us for greater glory. St. Paul says these momentary afflictions are producing for us a weight of glory beyond all compare. And so you see, we don't always think correctly about what's good and what's bad, or what's we like and yet versus what we need, and so on. And so in God's providence for us, He's allowed certain troubles and struggles. Okay, and we'll look at the bigger things in a minute, but just think of that parable again. There's this man, and things go wrong, which end up being the way that things go right in the next section. And things go right, but then they set up something that makes it go wrong. You know, we're not always sure how all this pans out. God sees the whole picture. We just see a tiny little sliver, right? Now, let's give a couple of other thoughts here. You know, I think an awful lot of our suffering, this kind of anguish cry, why? Why? You know, I think one of the things we have to get rid of, and this is what Job learned in the book of Job, we've got to get past this demand to understand everything. We're not going to understand all of God's ways. We're just not going to understand how the manners of some of God's providence. He often lets things go bad for a while so that he can then draw something good out of it, you see. The autumn leaves are dying and falling from a tree, but they become a beautiful source of soil for the next year's, leaves. And there's just a cycle that sometimes we have to go through. And God uproots something to plant something else. God permits something he closes one door in order to open up another door, which might be better for you. So, but I needed that job, and well, I know, but maybe there's even something better, see? And as I look back over the rearview mirror of my life, I can see a lot of that. The things I thought I needed, or I needed to go this way or that way, they didn't go the way I wanted, but somehow God did something either even better, or at least I'm okay. It's not like my whole life ended. And to learn that God is up to something much bigger than he could ever explain to us. He says to Job is demanding, why am I haven't done anything wrong. What did I do to deserve this? And finally, God just has to say to Job, I'll answer your question of why, if you'll answer my question, How did I put the stars up there in the sky? How did I make this earth? How did I carve out the place for the oceans and say to its proud waves, this far but no further? How did I do all that, Job? How did I put the moon up there? How did I, create all these things? How did I do it all? If you can answer me that, then maybe I can get around to answering you what you're asking. And Job kind of put his hand over his mouth and said, I've sinned. And again, I think if God tried to explain to us these things we demand to know why, that we would in every way, all we would hear would be thunder. We couldn't understand what he was saying anyway. Because God has in mind 3-4 things that way ahead of us that haven't even been, from our perspective, even invented yet, or haven't even occurred to our minds yet. And yet God is thinking these things through, and God sees ahead because every moment of history is present to him, past, present, and future. God answers prayers faster than right now and sooner than immediately, because the future is just as present to him as the past as is now. And we think we know how to tell God what's good and what's bad. And so this question of why, is understandable at a human level. And we can get little answers to it. We'll talk about some of them here in a moment. But there's an awful lot that's just mysterious. It's part of God's providence, and it's just not for us to know. And I tell you, we lose our serenity so quickly when we demand to know why. And we gain serenity so quickly when we stop demanding to know why for everything. Just to say, all right, Lord, I don't know why. But it's enough for me to know that you know why. That you know what you're doing. You know, Lord. I don't, but you do. I'm going to trust you. You know, those disciples who followed Jesus on his road up to the cross that last year of his public ministry, all along the way they were kicking and screaming. They were saying, what do we want to go up to Jerusalem for? And then, Rabbi, they're threatening to kill you. What do you want to go there for? Thomas threw up his arms and said, let's all go to Jerusalem and die with him. Let's just die with him, they're scared. And, well, why are we going here? What's going on? Why are you doing this? Of course, he had already told them, I'm going to suffer and die at the hands of men and rise on the third day. And I'm going to do this to save your souls. But it wouldn't register with them, see? Why is he? And so he led them to his own cross. And he says, now you too will have times in your life when I lead you to the cross. But I want you to know, just as I rose from this cross, you will too. And I didn't just take up my former human life. I took up a glorified body. See? And you will too. So somewhere we find a lot of serenity when we drop our demand to know and understand everything, which we can't do in the first place. And a lot of serenity comes to us. Now, we're about to take a break, but when we return, I will give you maybe some of the answers that we've come up with, as to why God permits things, bad things, but they're only small answers. They don't really get the whole picture. Do you see what I'm saying? Be careful. Stop demanding that you should be able to understand everything and that God owes you an explanation for everything. That is not going to lead you to serenity. We'll talk after the break.
Thanks for listening to A Life Lived Joyfully. Do you have a question for Monsignor Pope, or would you like to comment? Give us a call now at 877-757-9424. Again, that number is 877-757-9424. We'll be back after the break.
So the neighbor who we've spoken to, just in greeting, but who I don't believe has ever spoken back to us, out of the blue, surprised us. One day we were getting the kids in the car for Mass and asked us if we were going to Mass. I was dumbstruck for about probably 10 seconds. It was great that we had an opportunity to share about our parish and that we were Catholic. Turned out she was Catholic too, and she assumed we were because of the bumper sticker on our car.
The Guadalupe Radio Network. Radio for your soul.
Hi, Julie Carrick here, host of We Sing Our Faith, sharing the music and ministry of many of today's Catholic recording artists. I am delighted to be the host of this weekly program on Saturday mornings at 9 o'clock Central Time. Julie Carrick with We Sing Our Faith, Saturday mornings at 9 o'clock Central, here on the Guadalupe Radio Network.
Thank you for listening to the Guadalupe Radio Network and being part of the family. Families pray for each other. We would be honored if you would let us pray with you and for you. You don't even have to tell us your name. Just go to our website, grnonline.com, or call our prayer request line and leave us a message at 800-395-4008. That's 800-395-4008. We will be praying for you every day.
Welcome back to A Life Lived Joyfully on the Guadalupe Radio Network. Give us a call. The lines are open at 877-757-9424. That's 877-757-9424.
And we are back, and 877-757-9424. Well, why does God sometimes say no or doesn't seem to do what we want right away? Or why does he let whatever negative thing, fill in the blank, happen? Well, I've given you some things to think about already. Sometimes we don't even know that something's good or bad. By the way, the scripture says everything works together for good for those who love and trust the Lord. Everything, not just the good things, the obvious blessings, but even the less obvious ones, the gifts and strange packages. They're all part of God's providence, too. And they work for our good somehow, mysteriously. Okay, but when God does sometimes say no, or at least this is not something that I'm going to, just intervene with right away or what have you. Sometimes no is the best answer, right? Remember St. Paul said 3 times I asked the Lord to relieve this physical suffering that he had, probably something related to his eyes, But Paul says, no, Paul, I won't. My grace will be sufficient for you. And for power is made perfect in weakness. So now it says, St. Paul, I boast most gladly of my weakness, in order that the power of Christ may dwell with me. And I'm content with weakness and insults and hardships for the sake of Christ. For when I am weak, it is then that I am strong. Isn't it interesting? Moses was at his prime at age 40. He was fully educated, physically strong, ready to lead the people. But he was too proud. God couldn't use him, too proud. He went up and killed a man. Thought he knew how to lead people out. He's going to, wipe out the enemy and lead the people forth. Well, God says, you're too proud. I can't use you. Off to the desert with you. Finally, after 40 more years, he's now 80. Moses is finally old and humble enough that God can use him. Sometimes that's when we're weak, that's when we're strong. So sometimes God permits sufferings and things to make us weak, to keep us humble and make us more easily used by him. It could be any number of things, but sometimes no is simply the best answer, because God is working something through that suffering. Now, number two is the reason that God sometimes let bad stuff happen might sound a little paradoxical to you, but the reason is because God is love. Now, look, all of us have been children of parents, and many of you listeners are parents, and look, that sometimes you have to impose things on your children, suffering. They don't want to go to the doctor. Well, they're going to go to the doctor anyway. It's the first day of school. I'm scared to go, Mommy. Well, you're going to go anyway. Why are you doing this to me? Why is this happening? Why? Well, because it's important for you to break through your fear here and to begin to meet other people or get to the doctor, get a shot. It'll hurt for a minute, but it's for the greater good. And likewise, again, I'm expecting you to do your homework. And, there's a lot of things that parents sometimes have to impose on their children. And they do it because they love them, not because they hate them or are despotic. And it's the same with God. Sometimes God says, I need you to accept this challenge. I need you to accept this suffering so that you can grow. Sometimes parents put their kids through suffering so they can grow. Sometimes parents put their kids through suffering so they can be corrected. You're going to be punished for that. You can't think that you can get away with that. See, and that's how you learn. So again, there are places to say that sometimes difficult, painful things come to us as a way of God kind of correcting us or admonishing us or helping us to step out and face our fears and overcome them. And so again, these things, to say sometimes God says no or allows difficult things to happen because he's love. Sometimes because no's and difficulties are the best answer. Think of physical therapy. People come out of surgery, and the last thing they want to do is get up out of that bed and face the pain. At first, it hurts to move a part of your body that's been cut open and sewn back together. And you're like, I don't want to do that. And he said, well, if you don't, it's not going to heal right. You've got to get up and you got to face the pain and do it. Well, I don't want to. Well, you need to. Get out. Get out of bed right now. Well, get out. And that's love, see? It's not hate. And so sometimes God is this way with us. Number three, sometimes our request can't be affirmed without violating another person's freedom. Well, Lord, I've been praying, and why are you letting, this husband or this son or daughter of mine to not come to conversion and come back to the church and so on? Well, I can send them the graces, but I can't force them to make a decision against their own will. I can't, I won't violate their freedom, see? So the way God has set things up is there's some things even God can't do. And I put that can't in quotes. Can't because that's the way he set it up. He says, I will not force you or anyone to keep my commandments. You will experience bad consequences. I will give you all the graces needed to find your way back. Yes. But at the end of the day, I can't and won't force you. Well, make sure I get the job. Are you asking me to force this guy who interviewed you to give you the job? Yes, Lord, yes. Well, I can't. I won't do that. And so on. So you start to see that, again, God has set up things in such a way that there are going to be times where what we ask of God is something that can only come about if a human person with freedom says yes. God can send certain graces or encouragements, but at the end of the day, the person can either ignore these or withstand these. And it's part of the way God set it up. Human beings are free. Another reason that sometimes God has to say no is that a request can't be granted because it might cause harm to others. Now, the classic example is, we're having a picnic. I don't want it to rain. It shouldn't rain because we're having a picnic. It's all about us. It's all about my picnic and my family, and we don't let it rain. And it rains, and boy, does it rain. He said, well, where's God? Why did that happen? Well, because the farmers needed the rain, and not just the farmers, but all the people they're trying to feed. So again, sometimes what we ask of God, even if we do it unknowingly, it might lead to the harm for other people if He were to accomplish it. See, Your life isn't just about you. My life isn't just about me and what I want. God has a bigger picture in mind. He has the needs of everybody in mind. Sometimes the common good requires that God says no to us, that things need to be given to someone else, and so on. So again, these things, we want to remember when we say, well, why doesn't God just, solve stuff real quick? Why does he let this stuff go on, right? Again, sometimes God doesn't grant things because our faith isn't strong enough. This is brought up in Scripture. Jesus says, if you believe, you'll receive whatever you ask for in prayer, if you believe. The book of James says, when a person asks God of something, he must believe and not doubt, because he who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. That man should not think he'll receive anything from the Lord. Now, James speaks strongly here, but the point is that, again, sometimes our faith isn't that strong. And sometimes the Lord wants us to know, do you really believe I can do this? See? In Nazareth, Jesus couldn't work any miracles there, so much did their, quote, lack of faith disturb him. All right. Sometimes we can't get what God is asking because of unrepented sins. It puts a barrier between us and God. This is from Isaiah 59. Surely the arm of the Lord is not too short to save, nor his ear too dull to hear, but your iniquities, your sins have separated you from God, and your sins have hid his face from you so that he will not hear you. Or again, finally, sometimes God can't trust us with blessings because we're not conformed to his word and we're not trustworthy in lesser things. Oh, Lord, give me a little more money. Yeah, so you can squander it and buy stuff that'll cause harm to you and others. No. But again, these are just some real quick answers. Brothers and sisters, why? We have a little glimpse, but most of it's mysterious. And stop demanding to know why all the time. And you'd be surprised if you can withdraw that demand, that serenity might come to you a lot quicker. And may Almighty God bless you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.